Election cycle was a landmark year for black mayoral candidates. Eric Adams in New York, Justin Bibb in Cleveland, Andre Dickens of Atlanta, and several others became mayors of major cities across the country. Also, cities like Kansas City, Kansas, St. Petersburg, and Pittsburgh elected their first black mayors ever. While the wave of black mayors taking office is significant, one mayor's decision to walk away from office was just as significant and grabbed just as many headlines. Last May, Keisha Lance Bottoms announced that she would not seek re-election as Atlanta's mayor after just one term. Bottoms cited the pandemic, Atlanta's crime surge, and conflicts with the police power structure as catalysts for her decision. According to a new piece in New York Magazine, it often seemed that this idea that a black political structure is worth preserving in its own right hobbled Bottoms' response to a crisis whose dynamics kept shifting. But was the expectation of solving black people's problems as a black leader part of the equation as well? If so, will this new wave of black mayors succumb to the same pressures of forcing compatibility between black public service and solving the black community's problems? Joining us to discuss is university professor and host of Indisputable on the Young Turks Network, Dr. Rashad Richey. Dr. Richey, I just want to read another thing from that New York Times profile of Keisha Lance Bottoms, which I think was fantastic. And it includes this passage which struck me. Whether her successor builds on that legacy remains to be seen, but the deeper question about Bottoms' tenure haunts other American cities too, especially after George Floyd. Whether the demands of being a black mayor are at odds with making those cities work for all black people. What do you think of this idea?
You know, I think sometimes, Charles, we place pressures on black politicians that do not exist for politicians in general. Let's be very clear. A good black mayor is simply a good mayor. And a good mayor works for the advantage of the citizens in their jurisdiction. But let's be clear, we have something called inequities in our citizen groups. And in order to address those inequities, you must be hypersensitive to the problems that are unique to that particular group of individuals because of historic biases, marginalization, etc. So while some people may characterize it as, can a black mayor who advocates for a black community be a good mayor, or will they be at odds with the powers that be? I bring to your attention people like Mayor Maynard from Atlanta, who was able to do both. We have had those historic mayors who were advocates of the black community while at the same time making the community work for all of those who lived in it. Now, you will always have some naysayers. Criticism is the price you pay for leadership. And the day you're unwilling to pay that price is the day you're unfit to lead. So no mayor is without some level of criticism. But let's be very clear, even with all of the challenges of Mayor Bottoms, she still left office with a 68% approval rating, which is contrary to the headlines that you would look at to see what her popularity was. At the end of the day, she was still a more popular mayor in her mayorship than she was before she got elected mayor, which was less than 1% difference between her and her political opponent.
I want to ask you specifically about like how to split this hair. How do we separate, you know, the kind of problems that are just endemic to the human condition? There will always be criminals. There will always be heroes. There will always be people who do well, and there will always be some people in society who are poor. That doesn't get erased based on what the demographic is. It doesn't get erased based on who the mayor is. How do we separate that from the fact that for the black community, there are very specific issues that are not just endemic to the general population, but are specific to black people? These black mayors are basically having to negotiate both realms. Like there's some things that are just people problems and not black problems.
Some things
how do you separate those two, and how do they do that as politicians?
I think you make a great point, something that we need to highlight more. Some of the conditions are simply human conditions. For example, there's an ecosystem associated with criminality. In Ithaca, New York, they decided to stop simply having police officers respond to 911 calls. Now, let's be clear, Ithaca, New York is not majority African American, but they looked at their 911 data and they realized that 51% of their phone calls for 911 emergency did not require a police officer whatsoever. So what did they do? They decided to start hiring a trained social worker, two for every one police officer who was either dismissed, transferred, or retired, so that their police force could be reflective of the local community. What you have found in policing, Charles, is that there is a one-size-fits-all message, and that's not how policing works. No other government structure works by way of general sentiment. All government structures work by way of specific sentiment to that local community. So we have to start looking at policing from a localized level rather than this national overtone that we've interpreted policing as. The truth is, there's cop and there's community, but without community, there is no cop. 100% of the salary of every cop is paid by those who exist in that community. And until we have a synergy between those two groups, regardless of where it's at, you will never have a commonality among the community and police officer.
We've been talking a bit here about, unrealistic expectations placed on some mayors. But I want to know if you think that holds in a city like Atlanta, because, you mentioned before Maynard Jackson, since Maynard, Atlanta has had only black mayors for the last almost 50 years elected by black people. So does the idea that the black mayors are under unrealistic expectations hold in a city like Atlanta, which has had this very long string of black mayors?
Yeah, let me be very clear, Charles. I have been critical of black mayors in Atlanta. I have been critical of Mayor Bottoms with some of her decisions. I've been critical of Mayor Kasim Reed when he was mayor for 8 years in the city of Atlanta. What I submit is that the back and forth of politics is all about advocating for policy. So yes, there are some black folk who do not advocate for the true policies of those who elected them or the common individual. And that's why we have to continue to hold the powerful accountable every single time. Now, when you get into executive level politics like the mayor, especially the mayor of a big city, you have competing interests. You have developers, you have lobbyists, you have big money corporations, you have industry, and then you have the whisper. You have individuals that are saying things contrary to the good sense of the community. And so all of these variables are working as it relates to that mayor. Every single mayor lies when they first get elected. They tell you that they are ready to lead on day one. That's always a lie. They're ready to learn on day one, not ready to lead on day one. And any person in executive leadership who believes that they have all of the messaging, all of the data, all of the plans on day one, well, they're a fool for a mayor. The truth is, it's a learning process. And I think Mayor Bottoms did the stand-up thing, by the way, by admitting this was not the seat that I thought I would inherit by way of election. Some people say she quit. I think that's a mischaracterization. She did not reapply. She did not quit. She simply did not reapply for that job.
Dr. Rashad Richey, thank you so much for your time, as always.